Hello everyone, this is update for December 21, 2022, day 301 of the war and of the date update. So for those who are just looking for updates on the front line, there are no changes at all. There are some attacks, but essentially front line is the same. I'm gonna spend a little time talking about sort of general and strategic situation, and especially military sort of let's say military strategy or things that influence military strategy and potential outcome of the war down the road. So let's start with Ukraine today. And so Ukrainian president went to the U.S. where U.S. decided to give finally Patriot anti-air missile systems. Ukraine got one battery, which means there are 6 launchers and 4 rockets each, so it's 24 rockets. This is a pretty good system overall. The gem of it is actually its radar, not the rockets themselves. Rockets are just more or less sort of standard, nothing, just normal rockets. Let's put it this way. You cannot sort of, to be fair, most rockets are fairly primitive. So the advantage of this radar is that it's a passive, and it's a passive scan array radar. And the passive means here that you can detect sort of other objects without being detected. What this really means is that there is no irradiation from the actual radar. So you cannot really be detected from because when you emit radiation, you easily detectable. That's most of the radars, how they work. They're called active radars. They emit basically radiation, and it reflects back, and that's how they see other objects, and that's how they're easily destroyable. This one is actually pretty, let's say, advanced, given that it was designed like late 60s, early 70s. So this whole system is actually from the 70s, mid 70s. And so the passive part is extremely important because it allows you to remain essentially undetectable, which is extremely important, as you can imagine, in the war. The surprise and being hidden is the most critical to survival. So this is sort of great. This is great addition. It's certainly not enough by any means, because it just 6 launchers. They, it's not. There were no disclosure in terms of the what versions and so on, but essentially the effective range is about, depending on the sort of system, on the sort of, let's say, version of it, goes from about like 30, then 60 kilometers and 160 kilometers. So as you can imagine, you cannot cover all of the critical infrastructure parts with that by any means. And the importance of it is that as the speed of the opposing missile goes up, the range goes down. So it's kind of like exponential in a way, curve there. But Russia is not really shooting this hypersonic super fast missiles. So it's mostly just this cruise missiles, which around like the speed is like about 1,000 kilometers per hour, or this Iranian drones, which are super slow. However, there is sort of another kind of catch with this, is that, okay, for this cruise missiles that Russia is using, this is pretty good sort of tool. Still not clear if they can sort of catch them, because those cruise missiles, they fly very low above the ground to reduce detection with the help of radar detection. So we'll see how it works, but at least it's definitely sort of good conventional tool, let's put it this way. But for the Iranian drones, it simply does not make any kind of sense, because if Russia, let's say, launches 50 of those or 70 of those, and you have 24 missiles, some of them will definitely sort of get through, and that's part of the problem. The bigger part of the problem is the cost of those Iranian drones are extremely low. I don't know, probably like 50,000 or something, plus minus, maybe 70,000, versus one rocket for Patriot. I believe it's probably pushing close to 1 million. So this is simply like economical math does not work, basically, right? So you can simply drain all of the rockets basically by doing this sort of, because it's war of attrition. You will the cost will be so high, prohibitively high, to shoot down with this system Iranian drones. For those ideal ones are Gepard. Those I call it just Gepard systems that Ukraine got with 35 millimeter cannons. There are two cannons there. The problem there is that Ukraine does not get enough ammunition, and the reason for that is because the manufacturing ammunition is in Switzerland, and Switzerland does not basically allow to supply, does not want to, that prohibits Germany or anybody else from supplying those shells to Ukraine, and there is no other essentially like capable producer of those shells, because those shells are not they're not sort of primitive. They programmable, and basically was electromagnetically programmable when they exit the cannon, the barrel, and so you program where they're gonna blow up, at what distance. So that makes it extremely efficient against, let's say, Iranian UAVs, and cost effective. That's the most important part about that. But so far, there's a shortage of those shells. It looks like Germany is building new plant to produce those, but unclear when it's going to be. It's supposed to be sort of completed in 2023, and I even believe it's sometime in spring. But till spring, it's we need to survive till spring. Let's put it this way, and so. Again, it's great thing, and definitely helpful and so on, but it's just against the missiles, or against the targets that are up in the sky. It's not. It's almost kind of like in some ways like overkill, basically. Just too expensive for this, specifically for this Iranian drones, obviously, and. For the Russian cruise missiles, we'll see if it's able to basically detect them and destroy, because the reflection of those cruise missiles, they're pretty small and they go like very low above the ground. It's extremely hard with the radar, just the way the radar technology works. It's extremely hard to detect anything that's very close to the ground. So, and plus you have the small surface of the rocket, which makes it again more difficult to detect, because the reflection or that sort of disturbance that's created by the rocket is too little. So remains to be seen if they're going to be effective, because they're more designed for ballistic missiles, which Russia does not. Well, I guess they used a couple times. But that's also was a little kind of insane on the Russian side to use those. They just want to show, okay, we have them, we can use them. It's almost like shooting with cannon at birds. That's what Russia effectively was doing. They did it a couple times, but they really not using those. It's also extremely prohibitively expensive for Russia too. So they use these cruise missiles, which obviously cheaper. So remains to be. It's kind of like, in a way, it's a great thing, but the kind of targets that sort of operating on in Ukrainian sky, not exactly sort of perfectly matching for the system. But regardless, the system is really great and capable, even though it's being designed in, as I said, well, like early 70s, end of 60s. And just as a side note. This is maybe most viewers don't realize, but but all of the equipment that's being fighting in the West, and the Soviet equipment, is essentially the product of mostly 70s with some slight modification in 80s. And it just kind of tells us that essentially military technology got stuck in the 70s or and early 80s for the most part, with some modifications, sure, but that's definitely not brand new systems, with exception of maybe aircraft, things F-22, F-35, the Russian equivalents of those. That's probably something where there's brand new systems, but those are extremely handful in number, because they are also prohibitively expensive for everyone. But essentially, the interesting fact that we all fighting with basically old technology, there's no, it's all super old. I would say. So that's a little bit about that, and then let's now switch a little bit to Russia, because they also had some meetings in the Ministry of Defense, and Russian president was meeting. But the key point there is that they increasing army to 1.5 million from roughly 1.1. It was a little bit less than 1.1, but I think 1,080,000 or something. So roughly it's 400,000. What this means is this is really catch up to to kind of reflect the increase due to this mobilization, and catch up is 400,000. So 300,000 formally, that's what's the that's sort of formal official number of mobilized. So the other 100K is essentially 20,000 of those are volunteers. So basically, people just came and said well, we want to fight too. So 80K is actually Wagner mercenaries. So as you can imagine, this is really this Wagner group is growing essentially, almost I want to say exponentially. Out of that, obviously, not 80K are operating in Ukraine by any means, not even close. Somewhere between 20-30,000, at most 40,000 operating in Ukraine. So the rest is basically training. They also operating very small numbers in Africa and so on. But it just kind of shows us that Wagner Group is really becoming a little kind of army on its own. So it's you cannot even say it's NKVD troops during World War II, or SS, because those were obviously not not comprised out of prisoners, but in some way in terms of battle effectiveness, I guess they stand out in some way, similar to those two sort of type of troops, and not because of the kind of people, but because of the organization it was achieved in many ways, in different way organizationally than, let's say, what was done in World War II. So hopefully this little bit of our end as part of this, what Russian military is doing, they essentially, so in the past, during the Soviet Union and few years after the Soviet, probably more even not few, but almost close to 10 years, maybe less. So Russian military was using division as the main a foundational kind of unit. Then because of economic collapse, and generally societal collapse, they switched to brigade level, which is extremely trimmed down version of the division, shadow of division, I would say. And now they, since probably 2014, 2015, they switching really to divisional level again. They were essentially hybrid from that time, from 2014-15. As they increasing number of divisions, but it's still essentially hybrid system with significant portion of it being brigades. Now they moving more towards divisional level and just general large scale units like army corps and armies and all that stuff. And as a part of all of this sort of reorganizational effort, there will be 2 new airborne divisions formed, 3 new mechanized divisions formed, then 7 mechanized brigades will be converted to mechanized divisions, and then those naval infantry brigade that we see here, the 5 of them, so I'm not sure which one. Some of them might be like coastal defense, like I think it was like 126 one. Here we see that it's coastal defense. So unclear which ones exactly will be converted, but 5 of those will be converted to actually also divisions. So as you can see here, 40th, 155th, 336. There is just one more somewhere floating. They lost track of it, but 61st. So those probably will be converted to divisions. And then 126 probably also will be converted to division as well. Or actually, maybe this 100. So basically 5 of this, maybe 810s naval infantry brigade also will be converted. But essentially, most of this sort of naval infantry brigades will become divisions, which will increase number of sort of, let's say, battle capable troops in the Russian military as a whole. Then still on Russia, but more switching to China. So the former Russian president Medvedev, he flew to China to meet with, basically as envoy to relay a message from the Russian president to Chinese president. Basically, that was his job, and there was a statement from Chinese president that said that China is ready to work with Russia for new fair world global order. So this goes back to things that I mentioned, like probably starting from spring, that this war is not really about Ukraine. Ukraine is just a small case, sub-case of the much larger situation, and the whole point what's happening is China in particular wants to change the status quo that existed since 1945. Obviously, they want to change it into their favor because they believe that now they have much more economic clout, and therefore they want to convert that into political clout. Then to increase, then that in turn to convert into more economic clout. So basically, increase their wealth. So that's the whole point of what's happening, and Russia wants to do the same. But Russia was always sort of resentful after collapse of the Soviet Union, and essentially wanted, like how you call it, in sort of revenge, basically, sort of retaliation, similar to how Germany felt after loss in World War One. There was a lot of parallels in terms of societal feeling and how the society as a whole. I'm not talking even about Russian president, because it's not about Russian president, it's about Russian society. And society at large feels that they want revenge for the collapse of the Soviet Union, that, they shouldn't have lost, and basically they want to reverse the whole thing back to the, let's say, 1991. And so this is, so they have this common interest, and then Iran is also obviously joining it because they have sort of the problems of their own. So this is kind of like in some way strange coalition that's in a way forced. They don't have true sort of like true natural things in common. In some way, this is also parallels with World War II, where the Germany was ally of Japan, but they really didn't have much in common. Didn't even sort of like each other much at all, and so. So it's kind of like accidental forced alliance. But this is in many ways the same way. So anyway, Medvedev went there, delivered some message, whatever it is, and then uh, he returned with some military air cargo airplane. So it's very unclear what he sort of brought back. But this all moves, as you can see, there's extremely significant level of activity. If you remember, Russia's president and Minister of Defense and Minister of Foreign Affairs visiting Belarus a few days ago. Then this quick visit to China. So something is up. It's unclear. We'll see. We'll find out. Oh, and by the way, during this meeting, during this military top meeting, Russian Minister of Defense clearly stated that they are planning new offensive. That all of these troops are being assembled for new offensive. Just the only question is time. As I said, more likely than not, it's going to be end of January, maybe early February. And the other question is location, right? There are many choices here. The worst choice for the Russian side, and probably the best for Ukrainian side, is this North Donbass or Central Donbass front line. The most promising for Russia is obviously Zaporizhya front line, because that really can create huge opportunities for the Russian side. The North Lugansk sort of kind of doesn't make a lot of sense because you're just gonna, the best Russian side may just capture this whole area that I show around Siversky Donetsk, and by the time they capture, they will lose all potential, and then they just stuck, and they have this that has very little sort of strategic value or opportunity to jump out of this. It will be another half a year or up to a year before they assemble troops again of the required number. So basically, this is kind of leads to nowhere, essentially, attack here. Attacks here, as I said, the worst, because that's where there's a lot of urban area here in this North Donbass, Central Donbass. So to get through that, you will just basically lose all of the attacking potential of the troops, and by the time you get through this, you will get to the this western border of the Donetsk region. You will have no attacking potential left. So again, you're just gonna burn through all of your resources just to get sort of here. At the same time, this is the reason this may still happen here is because formally it's declared by Russian top that this is Russian territory. So they sort of let's say liberating Russian territory. So from propaganda perspective, that may be still okay to sell inside of Russia. So basically, Lugansk and Donetsk region is part of Russian Federation, and therefore we got what sort of belongs to us. So that may still somehow happen. The real sort of danger is actually this Zaporizhya front line here, because first of all, it's sort of relatively thinly manned by Ukrainian side and also by Russian side for now. The bigger problem is its open surface, open steppe, and it's going to be hard for Ukrainian side to defend, and defensive positions here are much harder to build overall because you're really open to artillery fire here, and if they punch through quickly through defensive line, then it's just open space, and they can create huge. I don't think they will create panic, but potentially they can create some encirclements. They can try to capture Zaporizhia, which will create huge sort of problems, they can destabilize Ukraine from within, essentially. So this is the most dangerous. Whether it's going to be sort of chosen will remains to be seen, because something tells to me that the Russian side will still choose this North Donbass and Central Donbass, just from a perspective, okay, we liberating this Donetsk region, but we'll find out probably in months and a half, where it's gonna go. Then also what it's interesting is that Russian president also said, like, that he knows of the real losses in the war, and almost tried to explain, like, kind of like tried to explain him away, like saying, like, oh, but there was no choice. So basically he's admitting that the losses are high, and like my estimate, it's about probably at this point 45,000 dead on both sides. It's really hard to say, who lost more or less. Sometimes, Ukrainian side has higher losses. Sometimes they're somewhere close to be even. But overall, it's probably, at least at this point, 45,000 dead on both sides, which also translates to probably similar number of heavily wounded, which means that many of those will not be able to return to normal life. And so the plus prisoners of war, especially from Ukrainian side, so that really gets you to 100K of people that sort of effectively just go on. And Russia's probably, like, let's say 95K, because there are a lot fewer Russian prisoners of war in Ukrainian captivity. Just saying, last numbers that were about like 2 or 3 weeks old, there was like 10,000 Ukrainians and 4.3 thousand Russians. So that's about sort of military situation update. Then another piece of information about Russia and India. They're trying to start trading, directly, and they're trying to avoid U.S. dollar or euro, and it just doesn't work. It's kind of interesting that they're learning that just wanting to trade, doesn't mean that it's going to happen, because they don't have currencies. It's basically, both sort of Russian ruble and Indian rupee is just essentially confetti, and so they don't trust each other, because they understand that this is absolutely not all currencies, they're not money really these days, but it's just the function is really like just a mean of circulation, basically, and you really cannot trust either Indian rupee or Russian ruble. And so the problem is that they cannot find what to exchange in, because the, how to say, least dirty short is either US dollar or euro, and Russian ruble or India are extremely dirty shorts, and that doesn't work. The other option would be gold, but that would be no go for, I would say, Russia and India, because that would destroy their own currencies, and currencies there are the additional tool of extracting wealth from the general population in both countries. They in general, you can say that that's true pretty much everywhere. It's just a question of how much extra extracted, right? With US dollar and euro, it's fairly small amount, but with Russian ruble and Indian, it's significant. So basically, it's just the ruling classes in both countries are receiving very high rent by forcing population in both countries to use those currencies, And if you switch to gold, you kill that golden, was it golden goose or golden chicken, whatever you call it, and they don't want to do it. And so they kind of like are stuck in this situation where, okay, using gold doesn't make sense. We're gonna lose much more, and then we cannot trade in rupee or Russian ruble because they are worthless. So things kind of like don't work basically, even though they want. So sometimes like wanting is not enough to be able to actually execute things. Then a little bit about China. Like last point about China is that Chinese GDP is projected to grow. I think it's a World Bank or IMF sort of estimates is projected to grow by 2.7% in 2022. The importance in not it's not just I just want to report what the number is. The reason I'm saying this is that if the growth in China is less than, let's say, 6 or 7%, the whole leveraged system will is going to collapse there, because all of this extreme leverage that's being built up in China is, in a way, it's kind of like a pyramid scheme. So you ever need to increase number of that to kind of keep it from falling it apart. So basically, you need ever increasing amount of resources to maintain the system, and that's why the systems, this whole leveraged, indebted systems, they're not sustainable anywhere in the world. But China is hitting the wall first relative to the rest of the world, and remains to be seen, because that's another sign that of the implosion, and very sort of soon implosion in China. And partly that's probably what explains this Chinese president rhetoric, where they're gonna be essentially fighting for the new world order, and they want to destroy the status quo, because, as I mentioned before, they need the release valve for this whole negative energy that's accumulated inside of the society, or it will blow up society. So in some ways, there is no choice there. Even that Taiwan is already in the pocket of China. Now let's actually switch to Ukraine. So the power grid is basically barely surviving without really any hope. So situation in Kiev remains to be extremely bad and difficult. People continue to have like about 2-3 hours of electricity for 24-hour period. Obviously, I honestly I don't know how people survive there. Many people do have the power generators, but it's just simply not enough. And I would bet that there will be a lot of people who may not survive because they just basically freeze to death. So that's unfortunately sad reality. And unfortunately, at the same time, Ukrainian government doesn't really do much to help. So that's a situation with the power grid. Now let's actually do walks through the front line situation, and we're going to start from the north and then going to go down in a clockwise fashion. So the situation along the state border somewhat got quieter recently, not as many sort of exchanges. Let's just quickly check the North Lugansk front line. Here, as you can see, it's more in the initiative is more and more in the hands of Russian side. So as you can see, Russian troops actively attacking, but so far without any success. Now let's jump to North Donbass front line. It's pretty active, as you can see. Wagner mercenaries continuing their attacks, but no sort of luck today. So things, status quo remains at this point. Now let's move to central Donbass front line. Things here are sort of returning to their typical ways, where Russian troops are trying to outflank this Avdiivka here, and where they sort of very far away from that, even though they had some initial successes here in Piski, but the things really bogged down for them, and apparently the chances of any further successes are close to zero at this point. And then this again futile attack, I would call attacks in Marinka, that where they claim that they almost captured it, but things basically never materialize. And then the same situation here in Novomikhailivka, no luck, and they essentially Russian troops are stuck here in Vuhledar. Velika Novosilka, if you remember, they tried here near Zolota Niva, so no success here. So essentially, situation overall here is, I would say, least promising out of anywhere for the Russian troops at this point. Then let's check Zaporizhya front line. Things here are quiet as always. However, as I said, could be the most dangerous area if Russian command decides to launch offensive in somewhere here. That's it for today. Thanks for watching, and until tomorrow. Bye bye.